"Hey, lady, the coffee shop's across the street." Derek Walsh sneered the moment Jessica stepped through the gun store's doors. Her faded windbreaker and peeling sneakers drew instant mockery from the testosterone-fueled crowd. "Real weapons require real knowledge," Brad Mitchell, the manager, called out dismissively. Tommy Rodriguez, in his backwards cap, whistled sharply. "Canvas bag, worn shoes, someone's lost." The weekend warriors erupted in laughter, phones already coming out to record the embarrassment. Jessica's weathered face showed nothing as cruel comments flew like bullets. "Show me the Barrett M. Rad." 338 Lapua, the military-exclusive variant, she said softly, her voice cutting through their laughter like a blade. The room went dead silent. That rifle existed only in classified circles. Derek's smirk froze. "What did you just—" Brad stepped forward, his face pale. "How do you know that designation?" Jessica's hand moved to her jacket pocket where dog tags pressed against fabric, tags from someone who died in her arms in the Hindu Kush mountains. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as every eye locked on this woman who shouldn't know secrets that could end careers. Before we continue, if you believe no veteran should be treated like a burden, type honor below. And tell me where you're watching from. This story hits different when I know who's standing with Jessica. I read every comment. The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Melissa Harper, clutching her pink pistol like a fashion accessory, was the first to break. "She probably Googled it," she laughed nervously, but her voice cracked. The crowd murmured agreement, desperate to explain away what they'd just heard. Rick Tank Johnson, his leather vest straining against his beer gut, stepped forward. "Look, sweetheart, knowing fancy names doesn't make you a shooter." His buddies nodded, but their eyes kept darting to the locked case where the Barrett waited. Jessica said nothing. She approached the display case with measured steps, her worn sneakers silent on the polished floor. Her fingers traced the glass above where the rifle lay, and something in her posture made the room feel smaller. "You can't even afford the cleaning kit for that thing," Kyle Stevens sneered, his vape pen dangling from his lips. At 19, he thought volume equaled authority. His friends howled, one slapping his back like he'd just delivered the killing blow. Patricia Blackwell, her tailored blazer screaming corporate success, pulled out her phone. "This will be cute for my story. Lost shopper at the gun shop." The flash popped, capturing Jessica's faded windbreaker for social media mockery. But Jessica's hand had stilled on the glass. She tilted her head slightly, studying the rifle's barrel with an intensity that made the laughter die in their throats. "The twist rate's wrong," she said quietly. Walter Gibson, the gunsmith, looked up from his workbench. He'd been silent until now, his thick glasses reflecting the harsh lights. "What did you say?" 1 in 10 twist. Standard military is 1 in 8 for the 338. Jessica's voice carried across the suddenly quiet shop. "This barrel won't stabilize properly past 600 meters. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. These weren't words from someone who'd Googled specifications. Walter set down his tools, his stained hands trembling slightly. In 20 years of gunsmithing, he'd never heard a customer catch that detail. Brad's face had gone white. The rifle had been modified specifically for the shop, the twist rate altered for civilian safety regulations. Only the manufacturer and 3 federal agencies knew about that change. "Lucky guess," Derek stammered, but his goatee couldn't hide the sweat beading on his upper lip. Jessica finally looked at him, her brown eyes steady and calm. "Show me the rifle," she repeated. "The real one, not this modified display piece." The words hit like a grenade in the center of the room. Brad's hands shook as he reached for his keys. The real Barrett M. Rad lived in the back vault, behind 2 locked doors and a security system that cost more than most people's cars. It wasn't supposed to exist in civilian inventory, but government contracts sometimes left loose ends. "You don't understand," Brad whispered, his voice barely audible over the shop's suddenly oppressive silence. "That weapon is classified. I could lose my license just showing it to you." Jessica's expression didn't change. She reached into her jacket pocket, her fingers closing around the dog tags that had never left her side. The metal was warm, worn smooth by years of anxious handling during sleepless nights when the mountain winds still howled in her dreams. Miguel Santos, she said quietly, reading the name embossed on the tags. Staff Sergeant, 75th Ranger Regiment. He died calling in coordinates while I provided overwatch from 847 meters. Her voice carried the weight of mountains and gunpowder and promises kept to the dead. The shop had gone morgue quiet. Even Kyle's vape pen hung forgotten in his mouth, no longer producing its annoying clouds. Melissa's pink pistol trembled in her hands as she slowly lowered it to the counter. Marcus Reaper Sullivan, a scarred veteran who'd been quietly browsing ammunition, straightened like he'd been electrified. His eyes locked onto Jessica's hands. The specific calluses, the way she held herself, the unconscious tactical assessment of every exit in the room. Hindu Kush, he said, his gravelly voice cutting through the silence. Operation Resolute Guardian, winter of 2020. It wasn't a question. Jessica's eyes met his across the room, two predators recognizing each other in a den of sheep. She nodded once, barely perceptible, and Marcus stepped back with something approaching reverence. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "You're the angel of the mountains." The nickname hit the crowd like a physical blow. Even the wannabe warriors had heard whispers of that legend. A sniper who'd held an entire valley for 3 days, picking off targets while her spotter called in air support with Taliban rounds snapping over their heads. Brad's key ring clattered to the floor. His face had gone the color of old concrete as pieces fell into place. The modified twist rate, the federal oversight. The Barrett that shouldn't exist but did, stored in his vault like a sleeping dragon. "I need to see some ID," he stammered. But his voice carried no authority now. Just the desperate hope of a man trying to avoid a federal investigation. Jessica pulled out a worn leather wallet, extracting a card that looked like it had survived an explosion. The plastic was scratched, the magnetic strip peeling, but the holographic seal caught the light like a prism. Most of the text was redacted black bars, but the clearance level was visible. Cosmic. Derek's legs nearly gave out. Cosmic clearance was reserved for operations that officially never happened, conducted by people who didn't exist on any roster. He'd been mocking a ghost. Patricia Blackwell deleted her story post with shaking fingers, her corporate confidence evaporating like smoke. The influencer bravado that had carried her through life meant nothing when facing someone who'd killed for flag and country. Henry Hank Davidson, the old shooter nursing a beer in the corner, set down his bottle with reverent care. He'd been in Vietnam, had seen real operators up close. The way Jessica stood, the micro-movements of her eyes cataloging threats, this wasn't stolen valor or weekend warrior posturing. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his voice carrying 40 years of respect for those who'd walked the dark paths. "It's an honor." Jessica nodded to him, one veteran to another, then turned back to Brad. "The rifle," she said simply. Brad's hands moved like he was in a trance, unlocking the vault that held America's deadliest secrets. The vault door swung open with a whisper, revealing the true Barrett MRAD in all its lethal glory. Mata black polymer and steel, configured exactly as Jessica remembered from those frozen nights in Afghanistan. The scope was a Leupold Mark 5 HD, the bipod a Harris Engineering masterpiece, every component chosen for one purpose: delivering death at impossible distances. Brad lifted the rifle with trembling hands, afraid to breathe on it wrong. The weapon weighed 22 pounds, but in Jessica's arms it settled like it belonged there. Her muscle memory kicked in instantly. Check the safety, feel the balance, assess the barrel's condition. 8 seconds, she murmured, and began field stripping the rifle. Her hands moved like water, each motion precise and purposeful. Bolt carrier group out, barrel assembly released, trigger mechanism separated. The components appeared on the counter in perfect order, laid out with the precision of a surgical procedure. The crowd pressed closer, hypnotized by the display. Tommy Rodriguez's backwards cap had slipped askew, his phone recording everything with shaking hands. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was watching a masterclass in controlled violence. 15,000 rounds through this barrel, Jessica observed, running her finger along the rifling. The throat erosion is consistent with M118LR ammunition, but there's copper fouling from civilian hunting rounds, too. She glanced at Brad. You've been letting customers test fire-classified ammunition? Brad's face went the color of ash. Federal agents would be very interested in that violation, and everyone in the room knew it. The shop's illegal side business had just been exposed by someone who could end more than just careers. Walter Gibson approached with the reverence of a pilgrim touching a shrine. Ma'am, I've been working on firearms for 20 years. I've never seen anyone strip a Barrett that fast. His voice carried genuine awe. Jessica began reassembly, her movements even faster now. 7 seconds, 6, 5. The rifle reformed in her hands like it had never been apart, every component settling into place with mechanical certainty. The buffer spring tension is 2 pounds over spec, she noted, working the bolt. In cold weather, it'll cause feeding issues. Your first round might chamber, but rapid fire will jam after 3 shots. Silence. Complete, total silence. Walter's mouth hung open as he processed the technical expertise he'd just witnessed. That specific malfunction had plagued the military for months before they'd identified the spring tension issue. Marcus Sullivan stepped forward, his scarred knuckles white as he gripped his own rifle. The Angel held off 200 Taliban with one of these. 3 days. No resupply. His voice carried the weight of military legend. The mountains remember, Jessica said quietly, her hands checking the rifle's zero. Miguel called in the airstrike that saved the convoy. I kept the high ground until extraction. She paused, her thumb tracing the rifle's receiver. He died doing his job. I did mine. The shop felt like a cathedral now, hushed and reverent. Even Kyle had removed his vape pen, sensing that something sacred was happening. These weren't war stories. This was testimony from someone who'd walked through hell and carried her brothers home. Patricia Blackwell found herself crying without knowing why. The casual cruelty she'd shown this woman now felt like blasphemy. How do you mock someone who'd bled for strangers, who'd held mountains against impossible odds? Derek Walsh tried to speak, to reassert some kind of authority, but no words came. His goatee couldn't hide the shame burning his cheeks. He'd insulted a guardian angel, mocked a protector of the innocent. The rifle settled in Jessica's hands like it was coming home. 22 pounds of precision engineering designed to deliver justice at distances most people couldn't comprehend. In her grip, it became something more, a tool of righteous purpose. Now, she said, her voice cutting through the reverent silence, let's talk about accuracy. There's a range out back, Brad whispered, his voice barely audible. Targets at various distances. He paused, swallowing hard. The furthest is 800 meters. Nobody's ever hit it. Jessica's eyes found the back door, already calculating wind patterns and elevation changes. In the Hindu Kush, we didn't have the luxury of known distances, she said, checking the rifle's scope adjustments. Taliban fighters at 600 meters, moving targets, snow falling so hard you couldn't see your own breath. The crowd followed her outside like pilgrims following a prophet. The range stretched across rolling hills, target stands positioned at increasing distances. The 800-meter target was barely visible, a steel plate no bigger than a dinner plate glinting in the afternoon sun. Miguel was my spotter, Jessica continued, setting up at the firing line with practiced efficiency. Mexican kid from El Paso could read wind like he was born to it. Smart as hell, funny as hell, dead at 23 because he wouldn't leave his radio. Her voice carried no self-pity, just the stark truth of combat. Marcus Sullivan positioned himself where he could see both Jessica and the target, his scarred hands steady as he raised his own binoculars. Day 3 of the siege, Taliban had us pinned down in a valley. Miguel was calling in close air support. Coordinates danger close to our own position. Jessica's breathing slowed, her body settling into the familiar rhythm of precision shooting. One shot to take out their forward observer. One shot to break their attack. The wind shifted, rustling through the grass. Jessica's eyes tracked the movement, calculating deflection and drop with the unconscious skill of a master craftsman. Behind her, the crowd held its collective breath. 847 meters, she whispered, and squeezed the trigger. The Barrett's report cracked across the range like thunder. At 800 meters, the steel target rang like a church bell, the impact visible even without magnification. Center mass. Perfect. But Jessica wasn't done. She worked the bolt, chambering another round. Miguel died with the radio in his hands, still calling corrections as Taliban rounds tore him apart. The airstrike came in 30 seconds later, exactly where he'd called it. Another shot. Another hit. The rifle sang its deadly song as Jessica demonstrated the skills that had made her a legend in the special operations community. Tommy Rodriguez's phone captured everything, but his hands were shaking so badly the video would be unwatchable. This wasn't a demonstration. This was a memorial service, conducted with bullets and remembrance. "I carried him out," Jessica said, her voice steady as her breathing. 200 meters through enemy fire, his blood on my hands, his tags around my neck. She paused to reload, her movements mechanical and precise. Promised his mother I'd tell her how brave he was, how he saved 37 soldiers with that radio call, shot after shot, each one perfect, each one a prayer for the dead. The target was demolished now, perforated beyond recognition, but Jessica kept firing until the magazine ran dry. Patricia Blackwell was openly weeping, her designer blazer stained with tears she couldn't control. The casual cruelty of her earlier mockery felt like a physical wound now. How do you apologize to someone who'd carried the dead home? Henry Davidson removed his faded army cap, holding it over his heart like he was at a funeral. In many ways he was. This was how warriors mourned, with precision and purpose and promises kept to the fallen. "Ma'am," Derek whispered, his voice broken by shame and awe. "I'm sorry." "We didn't know." "You weren't supposed to know," Jessica replied, setting the empty rifle down with reverent care. "Miguel and I, we were ghosts. We did our job in the shadows so you could live in the light." The range fell silent except for the wind through the grass, carrying with it the weight of sacrifice and the cost of freedom. The rumble of diesel engines broke the reverent silence. 3 black SUVs rolled onto the range, their windows tinted dark as midnight, their presence commanding immediate attention. The vehicles stopped in perfect formation, doors opening in synchronized precision. Colonel James Jim Patterson stepped out of the lead vehicle, his dress blues pristine despite the dusty range. 2 stars gleamed on his shoulders, and his bearing commanded respect from 50 meters away. Behind him, a detail of Rangers in full uniform fanned out with military precision. "Staff Sergeant Thompson," the colonel called out, his voice carrying the authority of decades in uniform. "You're a hard woman to track down." Jessica straightened, muscle memory snapping her to attention despite her civilian clothes. "Sir, I wasn't aware I was being tracked." "Congressional Medal of Honor recipients tend to stay on our radar," Patterson replied, approaching with measured steps. "Especially when they disappear for 6 months without forwarding addresses." The crowd's collective intake of breath was audible. Congressional Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration, reserved for acts of valor beyond imagination. Derek Walsh's legs finally gave out, and he sat down hard on the gravel. Brad Mitchell felt his world tilting off its axis. He'd insulted, dismissed, and humiliated a Medal of Honor recipient. Federal investigators would be the least of his problems when this story went public. Operation Resolute Guardian, Hindu Kush Mountains, December 2020. Patterson continued, his voice carrying across the range like a battlefield report. Staff Sergeant Jessica Thompson, acting as Overwatch sniper, engaged enemy forces for 72 continuous hours while her spotter coordinated close air support. Marcus Sullivan snapped to attention. his veteran instincts overriding everything else. He'd heard whispers of this action, fragments of classified briefings that painted pictures of impossible heroism in frozen mountains. When her spotter was mortally wounded, Thompson maintained her position for an additional 6 hours, eliminating 14 enemy combatants while simultaneously calling in airstrikes on her own radio. Patterson's voice grew stronger. She then carried her wounded spotter 200 meters through enemy fire to the extraction point. The colonel's eyes found each member of the crowd in turn, his gaze carrying the weight of judgment. Staff Sergeant Miguel Santos died of his wounds 30 minutes before helicopter extraction. Thompson refused medical evacuation until every member of the convoy was accounted for. Patricia Blackwell deleted her social media accounts from her phone, her hands shaking as she realized the magnitude of her earlier cruelty. She'd mocked a genuine American hero, someone who'd bled for strangers without asking for recognition. The enemy body count was 37 confirmed kills over 3 days, Patterson continued relentlessly. Thompson's actions directly saved the lives of a 36-member supply convoy and prevented the compromise of a classified military position. Kyle Stevens removed his backwards cap, his 19-year-old bravado crumbling under the weight of real heroism. He'd never seen combat, never felt the responsibility of other people's lives in his hands, never carried the dead home. She was recommended for the Medal of Honor by unanimous vote of her chain of command. Patterson's voice softened slightly. The citation reads, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of her life above and beyond the call of duty." Jessica remained at attention, her weathered face impassive, but tears tracked silently down her cheeks. Miguel's dog tags pressed against her chest, a constant reminder of promises kept and prices paid. The colonel stepped forward, his voice dropping to ceremonial tones. "By order of the President of the United States and the Congress, I have the honor to present you with transportation to the White House ceremony you've been avoiding for 6 months." He gestured to the SUVs, where Jessica could see more official vehicles arriving in the distance. "Ma'am, the President would like to personally thank you for your service. The ceremony is tomorrow at 1400 hours. The range fell completely silent as America's highest honor finally came calling for its reluctant recipient. Jessica looked at the assembled crowd, her brown eyes taking in each face that had mocked her just hours before. Derek Walsh couldn't meet her gaze, his earlier bravado replaced by shame so deep it seemed to bend his spine. Brad Mitchell stared at his shoes, already calculating the cost of his prejudice. "I came here for peace," Jessica said quietly, her voice carrying across the range like a prayer. "To blend in, to be nobody special, to maybe forget the weight of what we carried in those mountains." She picked up Miguel's dog tags, letting them catch the afternoon light. "But Miguel wouldn't want me to hide. He died believing in something bigger than ourselves. Bigger than fear or prejudice or the comfortable ignorance of people who've never heard shots fired in anger." Colonel Patterson stepped beside her, his voice formal but warm. "Staff Sergeant, your country needs to see that heroes come in all forms. Sometimes they look like weekend warriors with expensive gear. Sometimes they look like tired women in thrift store clothes carrying the weight of the world." The crowd began to understand the magnitude of their cruelty. They'd mocked someone who'd bled for them, who'd carried their freedom on her shoulders through frozen mountains while they slept safely in their beds. "Ma'am," Marcus Sullivan said, removing his own military cap. "Permission to escort you to the ceremony?" His scarred hands shook slightly as he spoke. "It would be an honor to stand with a genuine American hero." Jessica nodded, accepting the respect she'd never sought, but always deserved. Miguel would have liked that. He always said real warriors recognize each other, no matter what uniform they wear. As the official convoy prepared to depart, the consequences of the day's events began to unfold with military precision. Derek Walsh received termination papers before the SUVs left the parking lot. Brad Mitchell found federal investigators waiting at his office, their questions about classified weapon modifications both pointed and career-ending. Tommy Rodriguez's viral video took on a life of its own, but not the way he'd intended. Comments flooded in from veterans worldwide, each one condemning the treatment of a Medal of Honor recipient. His sponsorship deals evaporated within hours, replaced by death threats from people who understood the true cost of freedom. Patricia Blackwell's corporate career imploded as her earlier social media posts resurfaced, showing a pattern of disrespecting service members. Her company issued a public apology and quietly requested her resignation, unwilling to be associated with someone who'd mocked a genuine American hero. Kyle Stevens found himself the subject of military recruitment videos, his disrespectful behavior used as an example of civilian ignorance about military sacrifice. His college applications were rejected one by one as admissions boards discovered his viral infamy. But Henry Davidson received something different, a personal phone call from Jessica, thanking him for his service in Vietnam and his respect at the range. Real veterans, she told him, always recognize each other. His quiet dignity in the face of his own demons had not gone unnoticed. Walter Gibson was offered a position as a federal firearms inspector, his expertise and respect for military service making him a valuable asset. Sometimes, being on the right side of history opened doors you never expected. As the convoy disappeared into the distance, carrying Jessica toward a recognition ceremony 6 months overdue, the gun shop remained silent. The place where heroes had been mocked would never be the same. In the end, the truth had a weight that couldn't be measured in pounds or calibrated in scopes. Jessica Thompson had carried her burden silently until the moment her country called her home to receive the honor she'd never sought, but always deserved. Miguel's dog tags rode with her toward Washington, where a grateful nation would finally say thank you to someone who'd sacrificed everything for people who'd never know her name. To everyone who typed honor and shared where you're watching from, thank you for standing with our heroes. Subscribe for more stories like this. See you in the next one.